Okay, well, I'll just kick us off and just say thanks very much, Mel. Me and Third Space, obviously, we know each other and have done a few of these in the past. Just wanted to extend a platform for you to talk about your experiences with this bill. The first thing I ever heard about it was Third Space talking to me about some of the stuff she had learned from you. Um, from Third Space, but I thought it'd be a good opportunity for you to talk a bit about how did you know about this, first of all, because I mean, I'll be the first to admit I've been so preoccupied with the Treaty Principles Bill. Um, and thank you for bringing it to light. So, my first question, I guess, is how did you know to look into this?
Kia ora. Yeah, thanks so much for the invite and the opportunity to talk about it. It's really good to be here. It started for me last February. I did spent about a month doing an analysis of the Treaty Principles Bill and what it would do if it was passed. And I realised through that analysis that there were potential alternative interpretations for what was being proposed as treaty principles, if you like, and that they had very libertarian specific meanings that were very different to common usage. And so I've watched the narrative and done some writing throughout the year with that awareness of the Treaty Principles Bill. And if we fast forward to, I think it was November, was it, when the actual bill came out, and it had no definitions included, which surprised me because the libertarian definitions of the treaty principles are very in alignment with Seymour's narrative that we've heard all year. And I thought it was unlikely they would have left it to chance, that it wouldn't be common usage meanings, but the libertarian ones. And so I went on a little explore to see if there was anything else I could find that might shine some light on how they would be defined. And I looked through the ACT National Coalition Agreement and spotted this regulatory standards bill, and I thought that looks really boring. I don't even want to go and look at that, but I thought it looks so boring I probably should. And, I am aware that regulation is actually incredibly powerful, so I've always been a bit wondering what David Seymour wanted to do with his Ministry for Regulation, and, that was on the radar as something potentially very significant. So I went and had a look at the ACT policy on this bill and realised it had been introduced 3 times previously, so read the last iteration of it and the earlier ones, and got very concerned at what I saw. And my first thought was, it sort of looks like a treaty principles bill through another process and another means. And the principles proposed are actually, a lot of them are really quite similar. So I started doing some analysis and a lot of reading, and spoke to some clever legal people for, to check if I was understanding things correctly. And they were all like, "Oh shit, you're right. This is a really huge, scary thing." So wrote that up, got it ready to publish, and was pretty much at the point of pressing publish when I realised that consultation on this bill had opened some days prior. So that made me take pause and see what was actually being proposed this round. So that's how I came to it.
Right. And how long ago, and so it was introduced from my belief, it was introduced on the 14th of November. When did you come to the realization that, oh my gosh, we need to do something about this?
So almost as soon as I saw it, really, that was my first reading, but it took, I don't want to jump to conclusions. So it took quite a lot of analysis to confirm that, I guess, and then trying to disprove it and asking for other experts to look at it. That was in November, and consultation opened on the 19th of November. This is by the Ministry for Regulation, which is the same day the Hikoi arrived at Parliament. And when I saw that timing, I thought, aha, okay, this really looks like a smokescreen that the Treaty Principles Bill is avoiding public attention on this regulatory standards bill. And so that was sort of the time frame of that. So it was took more time after that to go through what all the detail of what is being proposed to be changed from the 2021 bill and look at the regulatory impact statements and those sorts of things to update my analysis.
Awesome. Third Space, did you have a question? I saw you just in the chat, just said there was a question you could pose to Mel.
Yeah, kia ora. Kirsten's asked, and I think it's a great question. So what does this bill mean for us in layman's terms? And I said, we can ask Mel that.
That's why she's here.
Yeah, great question. And I think it's been quite a process of, getting our own heads around it, those of us who've been diving into it and then figuring out how we explain that, because it sounds incredibly boring and bureaucratic and, confusing. And most of us don't even think about that background regulation stuff. But basically it means all of our laws, all of our regulation, and that means everything from the smaller rules to government policies and interventions. So the large part of everything that happens under the government should, in future, after this bill is passed, if it is passed, should be rewritten and realigned to be consistent with basically ACT Party policies and ideology, which we would call a libertarian set of principles that this bill is proposing. And that means that it's all about real individualistic rights, property rights, corporations' rights, really reducing the role of government. So it's kind of been described as the everything bill, which I think is a really good way to put it, because you'll hear people going, it's about this, and someone else is saying it's about getting rid of tutility from our laws, and someone else is saying it's about the environment, and someone else is saying it's about getting rid of workers' rights and it could reduce minimum wage, and someone else is saying it's deregulating and we might have big health and safety disasters. So yes, it's all of those things, which is why it's so hard to get our heads around.
Jen, do you have another question?
I guess, Mel, you talked about the principles and the libertarian principles, or, David Seymour's 10 best ideas for living his best life. Would you be able to give us an overview of those principles? Just as you see them, or as they stand in the 2021 bill, which is the form I understand it will be put forward in largely.
Yeah, so the full list of the principles is in a discussion document, which is downloadable from our link tree. Maybe you could put the link in the comments, Jen, and it's also on the Ministry for Regulation website. And it's a little bit different from the 2021 set of principles, but, significantly the same. So in there's a whole lot of principles, and some of them are kind of like normal things that we might take for granted and are fine and good ideas, and we do them anyway. But then a whole lot of them are really specific political beliefs, so not generally broadly accepted things. And some of the key ones there are individual liberties, and that you can only impinge or impact someone else's individual liberty. And we need to remember here that an individual can be a corporation too. So you can only impact someone else's liberty or freedom if it's directly to benefit another individual's freedom. And so for anyone who has an ounce of, belief that we live in a community and a society, and that that's really important, or that iwi hapu whānau is important, or even just that we're interconnected and we have responsibilities to each other, that principle just gets rid of anything that would look after people collectively. And likewise, you couldn't say stop someone polluting their river for the environment, because that's not another individual's liberty. It's the environment. It's a public good. It's like also what we rely on to exist. But so that's one example. Another's around property rights. So at the moment, of course, we have property rights if you own property. But this would really make property rights supreme over most other rights. And some of the things that you'd see that do, again, the pollution example comes to mind. A well-documented example is that if you, for example, the government regulates to say that tobacco companies have to use plain packaging, then that could be seen to impact on their property right, which includes their label and their brand. And so that company could sue the government for compensation for loss of income from being impaired from using their property. And so this is incredibly different to anything that we have in our laws. Jane Kelsey has described it as being quite similar to what you see in some of the international free trade agreements that even this government doesn't want to sign up to because they would put that obligation on us. So it seems a bit crazy to be doing it to ourselves. There's also principles about taxes, and so it could really see the taxes on wealthy people reduced significantly and public service funding reduced. So the way that you're taxed or have to pay levies is meant to, under this bill, to be proportionate to what you directly receive back. So, for example, taxing wealthier people to fund healthcare for poorer people, or education, for example, could be seen to be inconsistent with that principle.
And so, Mel, when you were talking about property rights there, I think, one of the things I've really been learning about, particularly with this bill, is to really look carefully at language, like what we mean when we hear the word individual, what everyone might mean, and what property rights might mean. And you mentioned some points there about their label and their brand. Do property rights also include, or what else do these property rights include? Is that profit? Because to me, I listen and think, well, property rights, I might be thinking like, an asset that you own. But if we sort of, can expand that out, thinking about what individual means in the context of this bill, that is big business, could you, talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so property rights, you're right. We tend to think, that's the house or it's the land. But property is much broader than that. So, for example, someone's business is a property. And I saw that the Labour MP Duncan Webb has written about this bill, and he said that if you're considering regulation under this bill, for example, at an early childcare centre, then instead of considering when you do nappy changes as it's best for the child, you'd be considering how you do them so it's best for the business, the property. And so it really is a good example of how it just turns how normal people might think on its head to be very profit and business centered. Another example would be intellectual property. And another example would be, for example, mining license. So say a company is given a mining license under the fast track or by any other means, and then a future government wants to regulate to protect the environment and reduce or place limitations on it or even cancel it, then that company and corporation could sue the government for compensation, for fair compensation is what's being proposed, for the loss of the profits, for potentially, who knows how long, maybe many years of profits forward for the duration of their license. So it's a very broad thing, and it's even just that in itself is quite hard to get my head around. So if anyone else is struggling with that, then I totally get you.
And it seems you mentioned that these entities, these individuals, would be able to go and put in a complaint or ask for a review and seek the compensation. And one of your pieces of writing, you mentioned it was a almost like a libertarian version of a Waitangi tribunal, and which I guess is a good segue into that. You've called this also the Treaty Principles Bill, like the Trojan horse, and this is sort of potentially. I've been thinking Seymour's bottom line that Luxon was quite insistent that the Treaty Principles Bill wasn't. So just with respect to that comment that you wrote around the libertarian version of a Waitangi tribunal, could you just sort of talk us through what your research has shown could potentially happen if these businesses decide that there has been a deprioritization of their profits or their interests, and what they might be able to do about it?
Yeah, so let's talk about that before we get to the relationship with the Treaty Principles Bill. So one of the other things this proposed bill does is to set up something called the Regulatory Standards Board. And that's a board whose members are appointed by the Minister for Regulation, which is David Seymour. And the role of that board, I have compared it to the Waitangi Tribunal, but actually with more teeth and a lot more power, because the Waitangi Tribunal is not allowed to investigate legislation. As we've seen this year, once a bill reaches the House of Parliament, then they can't look at it anymore. But the entire role of the Regulatory Standards Board would be to investigate legislation and to investigate if a complaint is made that there are laws or regulation, and let's come back to what regulation means as well. But anyone can lay a complaint, so you or me or a business, corporation, that there is a law or regulation which is inconsistent with any one of the principles in the RSB. And then the board investigates and does an assessment, and they put out a report and a recommendation to the minister responsible that they should review that legislation or regulation and what changes perhaps they recommend. So the board can't order the government to do anything. It's just recommendations, similar to the Waitangi Tribunal. But to constantly have complaints against a government and to put huge amount of time and resource into, analysing, assessing, defending, justifying in public. So the minister would be required to publicly justify why it doesn't align with the principles. So that's huge, both financial and time cost, and probably like a big political cost because of the pressure. Well, you're not following the rules. You're not doing what you're meant to do. That's bad, even if people don't get the complexity of it's not bad, it's good, it's the principles that are bad. So that's the role of the board. And so that's a lot of, some of the critiques of that are that it's a lot of power vested in the Minister for Regulation and that board, which is not, usually that kind of role sits with Parliament and they're elected by us, whereas the board is appointed by the minister. And, if it was, say, a court looking at such complaints, they would be able to take different things into account, like Te Tiriti or Waitangi, for example, or the New Zealand Bill of Rights, or a wide range of things, whereas the way it's written at the moment, the board would just be required to assess for consistency with those principles. And you can make a complaint on a law or a regulation being inconsistent with just one of the principles. So that language is quite similar as well to what we hear with Te Tiriti or Waitangi, inconsistent or consistent with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. So there's perhaps been a bit of like modelling done off that side of things.
Yes, they might not like it, but they've certainly seemed to mirror some of the mechanisms and processes perhaps into these shaping around libertarian tribunal, if you like. There's a couple of questions here, Mel. I'm wondering, has there been any indication about who might be on this board or how this board might be elected or determined. I know with the fast track legislation, a key concern we had was when they talk about these proposals and projects being assessed by a panel, one of the key issues, and even in after the select committee process it still stood, was that the minister would be able to appoint the convener of the panel, and then that convener of the panel will work with the minister to then appoint 3 other people, including a local government representative and maybe an iwi representative, but it was all sort of came back to the choosing of the minister for the fast track. So I'm curious, and there's quite a few questions here asking, is it going to be Seymour's mates? Do you know anything about how that selection process is proposed to look?
No, I don't. I don't know much information about that. And yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's just the Minister for Regulation that would appoint, and presumably it would be people that were skilled in the areas of those values and principles. So yeah, probably would be people who'd be Seymour's mates. And I think one of the things here is it's easy to go, oh, but we could make complaints too. But if we don't believe in those principles, there'd be no point making a complaint, because you'd like things to be inconsistent with them. And likewise, I feel a bit the same about who's on the board. They'll be upholding those principles, which I fundamentally disagree with. So yeah, I'll be interested to find out more information. If other people have that, they might want to put some of that out. And yeah, I saw that lawyer Max Harris, who's made his submission public on this bill, he describes the principles as right-wing libertarian ideology or hard right, maybe he said, I can't remember. But, I think we need to be aware that that's sort of a way they're described ideologically, and, in an economic sense, they're neoliberal principles and values.
So on that, Mel, and I'm aware of time and your time. You have been doing such a huge amount of work on this bill, and even today I've seen you've put out yet another really practical resource on your Substack. So I'm keen to return back to the relationship between the TPB and the RSB, and if you have any comment on that, or something to share with us.
Yeah, I think this is really important. So I've described these 2 bills as 2 sides of the same coin, and people are probably going, what? They sound completely different. So the reason I say that is because the Treaty Principles Bill, its obvious purpose is to redefine the treaty, to remove its legal influence, and so it would become at best meaningless. But as I mentioned earlier, the principles it contains can be defined in very specific libertarian ways around individualism, private property rights. You can't treat anyone differently based on any characteristics such as gender or ethnicity, or if they're handicapped or whatever. It's just about a same approach for everybody. And also limitations on government. So if we go over to the Regulatory Standards Bill, its obvious purpose is to install a set of libertarian principles, which, surprise, surprise, are all about formal equality, where you can't treat anyone differently based on ethnicity or gender or blah, 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 as we just said. Private property rights, extreme individual liberties and rights, and limitations on government. So it's a very similar set of principles. And then what people perhaps aren't aware of is that currently Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the actual treaty principles are a core pillar of our lawmaking. And that's outlined in something called the Legislation Guidelines. If people really want to have a look, there's a whole chapter in there on how Te Tiriti is used in our lawmaking. And for 2 reasons, the Regulatory Standards Bill would change that. One is that it doesn't include te tiriti or any of the treaty principles in it, and so they're not mandated through that bill to be part of creating legislation and regulation. So they wouldn't have a way of being checked that things are consistent with the treaty, so would exclude it in a similar way to the Treaty Principles Bill would. And the other reason is that these highly individualistic rights in the Regulatory Standards Bill and the inability to, give special recognition to anyone based on characteristics. So you couldn't specially recognise tangata whenua, Indigenous rights, hapu, iwi. Those principles would be inconsistent with giving particular recognition to hapu or iwi, or to collective rights that would be guaranteed under te tiriti. So for both of those reasons, effectively the Regulatory Standards Bill would remove largely te tiriti from our lawmaking and all of government's interventions and work, essentially. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I've come to think about it. They both, both of the bills have very significant implications for te tiriti, but definitely are not limited to that. So te tiriti impacts are one part of the Regulatory Standards Bill, but it affects everybody and it affects everything.
The everything bill, indeed.
Mel, I've got a couple of questions here that's come through the chat. And I mean, who would these board members be? Would they be qualified, or what would David Seymour be looking for in that regards, I guess?
I don't know the answer to that, sorry.
Yeah. How do we as individuals oppose this bill? Obviously with what we're doing tonight, but I guess to latch on to that, how is New Zealand First letting this go by?
Yeah, so in terms of individuals doing something, I think learning about it and then talking to friends, family, colleagues, anyone who'll listen about it so they're aware of it is important, because this has really been slipping under the radar. If you have time before 1 minute to midnight tomorrow, you can write a submission, and Jen can share some links to submission guide and how to do that. It can be pretty easy. So this is on the proposal. So the submission you put in at the moment should help shape the final bill, which will then be introduced to Parliament at some point. But I think we shouldn't assume that it's a fait accompli, and we should be standing up strongly against this at every step of the way. So that's what people can do. Really, take it upon themselves to have their say, let people know about it, and this is going to be a long game, so we're going to need to say no for a long time. New Zealand First, I don't know. I don't know if they know what they've signed up to. It really seems to be very counter. New Zealand First was set up to oppose the privatisation and incoming international corporations that happened out of the 1980s, early 90s neoliberal reforms. And so given that this bill would, likely advance very similar things, I think if you're a New Zealand First voter or know people who are, or even if you're not, it'd be great to be contacting those MPs and, telling them you don't support this bill, and if they support it, you won't keep supporting them.
Interesting. I got another one, if you have time. Is it worth emailing local council and MPs directly as well as the committee?
Yeah, so at the moment the submissions are going to the Ministry for Regulation via email, and definitely forward your submission or your thoughts or write your email or whatever to your local MP or to any other MPs. and also opposition MPs, because we haven't heard much from them. I've just seen the Greens spoke out about it maybe today on Facebook, and Labour MP Duncan Webb has put out some really good analysis and opposition,
Yeah.
but we really need to be hearing from the opposition MPs. But we also need to be telling the government MPs how strongly opposed to this we are. And, I think they'll probably come back with, oh, but it's in the coalition agreement. But this is not the way that constitutional law should be passed in New Zealand. We're meant to have really broad support across parties, and it's meant to be passed with a supermajority. So that's like, I don't know, 70, 75% rather than just, 50%. So it should not be included in a coalition agreement. It's very anti-democratic way to make constitutional change. And this process is also very anti-democratic. It's been very quiet. They haven't really outlined really how important this is and what it would do. And it's happened over the summer holidays. So I think there's a lot of room for complaints about the process as well. And if you're having issues with OIA information, if you've put in official information requests, those sorts of things, then complaints can be made to the Ombudsman as well. So I think just sort of have a look at the various things that are possible to impact in different ways.
I've got another question, Jen, if you have one.
No, I was just going to toe talk all that. I think just that long game. And yes, there is an important piece of work to do between now and 11:59 p.m. tomorrow. And there's also pressure that can be put on, because this bill will be, the submissions in theory from this early consultation will be, yes, in theory, utilised to respond to and shape the proposed bill, and that will then go into the parliamentary process. So and Mel, just to your point about the consultation process itself, and there's pressure that we can put on MPs after the 13th of January, where we are saying, hey, what's up? This is the Ministry for Regulation. This consultation process seems to be pretty poor and contravene our democratic processes. So we can do things in the next 24 hours and we can do things after as well. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think we can put the pressure on National as well, because, they've kept saying they won't pass the Treaty Principles Bill, and they think we should deal with treaty things on a case-by-case basis. And, according to several key experts now that have spoken out, this bill would essentially achieve the same thing de facto. And so that really brings into question, I guess, Christopher Luxon's integrity around his statements on the Treaty Principles Bill. So let's put the pressure on there too.
So Mel, are you okay to stay in and answer some more questions, or do you need to go? I just thought I'd ask that.
Cool. Yeah, a few more minutes is all right.
Okay. So I got another question here. Would potential international investors be put off New Zealand with all the opposition from the public?
I would be if I was an international investor, but I'm not. So I don't really know how they think, but I'm sure there's someone that does know that. It would be interesting to know. But I would imagine that the uncertainty and unrest that this bill or the Treaty Principles Bill would be likely to create would probably be off-putting for business, because business really likes certainty. So I'm sure that if either of these bills passes, there'll be a huge amount of court action trying to figure out what the new playing field is, because it would change so much, and it would take, I imagine, some years for that to resolve.
Okay, well that sounds cool. So if let's say, for example, if you've still got a few minutes, let's just have a little bit of a discussion and get your view on, because me and Third Space are already of the same opinions. So Be interested to see what you think. Do you think the Treaty Principles Bill is a smokescreen for the RSB?
I think it has been probably used that way, but I don't think it's a harmless smokescreen. I think we have to absolutely stop the Treaty Principles Bill too, but it
Mm-hmm.
seems very suspicious to me that consultation for the RSB opened on the day the Hikoi arrived at Parliament, and that they're so very interrelated. So yeah, I do feel that, and I don't know what their timing would have been going forward, but it wouldn't have surprised me if they'd been planning to introduce it to Parliament, perhaps when the Treaty Principles Bill Select Committee reports back and media attention is over there and our attention. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it all plays out.
A video from Rihanna, who did a breakdown of the Treaty Principles Bill. The RSB. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not. She said that along the lines that shivers, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, Jen, do you have anything while I try to remember?
Yeah, I did see Rihanna's video, and yeah, it was awesome. I was going to say to people too, I think it's
sorry.
You go now.
Yeah, I was going to say I think it's important that we don't just make submissions saying, oh, you should add in the treaty or you should add in environmental protections. Like, we should say we object to this because these things are missing. But even if those things were added in, it would still be a really awful bill and create a totally different Aotearoa New Zealand to what we know and what we want. So I think we need to strongly oppose the bill, not just be trying to tweak it, but be explicit about those things as well. Yeah.
Jen, I'll ask you this question because we talked about this last night. Why is the media so quiet about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say for 100% sure why the media is, but I have my theories. I think there's a lot to do with the reality of what was it? I think it was Dr. Ryan Wardmell that actually talked about the shock doctrine. It was the first time I'd heard it, or I heard it from someone like him. There's a whole lot of stuff coming out really fast, but at the same time, if there is a car accident or something significant that happens, the media is pretty quick to jump on it. I understand that Mel did a press release that went via Scoop. That was picked up by, was it Wātea or Te Ao Māori News? There has been some movement in the media, but Mel, also, you can probably speak to some of the things that you have been directly involved in that I think it's tomorrow RNZ, is that correct? There will be a piece?
Yeah, so in December I was interviewed by Radio Wātea and Big Hairy News, and Brian Bruce Investigates, so there was a bit of pickup then when I started writing about this. And then, yeah, Jen and myself and Ryan Ward did a press release a couple of days ago, and that's been picked up. So Te Ao Māori News put something in writing out about it yesterday, I think it was, or was it today? Yesterday. And yeah, there's a couple of more mainstream media outlets have picked it up as well, so there should be stuff out tomorrow. My impression is, like, I was wondering why they weren't talking about it, and I think that they've just missed how significant it is, because, the Ministry for Regulation press release was all about, this is about transparency and good quality regulation, and it sounded so boring and plain, and who was going to want to talk or interview or write about that when there was a hikoi on with tens of thousands of people? So I think that's perhaps what happened, and it's only since I've been digging into it and writing and talking about it that a lot of people have been contacting media saying, why aren't you covering this? So that works, people. Keep it up. When there's things that need covering, write to the media outlets and ask them to cover them. So yeah, it's great to be getting more public awareness about this, and it's been amazing to watch the development of it on social media over the last few weeks.
Oh, it has been the last 2 days. Every single social media I have, things are just right there, and it's been amazing seeing how people are speaking to their audiences, generating support documents, and just really amplifying what this is about. And that is, it does feel like it's, we're in that sort of 24-hour push, but at the same time, there is a process from here that, while it is important, we are submitting now and responding to this, what has been put forward, that there is also going to be and will be other opportunities, right, as this goes through a process of being drafted, and then a select committee process as well. Mel, am I right there? Will it definitely be select committee?
There should be a select committee. I don't know if anything's definite in terms of
Yeah, that's
democratic
my
processes
concern.
under this government. So that's why I'm keen for people to have their say now. But yeah, there very much should be a select committee process. And a normal one is 6 months. Whether they'd give it that or try and rush it through, who knows? But they obviously think it's going to be pretty unpopular because they've not been very upfront and done it on the quiet over some of this consultation period. So that's not boding that well for for good process and transparency, especially given it's meant to be about transparency.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see what the outcome is after the submission period closes. And this is what I was talking about with Rihanna. Was in 2011, I think it was the last time they did a submissions for this bill, and there was only 50 that was recorded between corporations and lawyers were against the bill. I'd be interested to see what sort of progression it makes after this round of when the submissions close, as to whether or not the numbers are excessive in the opposing column, because I find it, and Mel, maybe you could talk to this, and Jen said there's 36 questions that I think they tried to confuse people about asking before doing a submission or something. Is that right? Because I only followed Jen's lead and went straight to the email.
Yeah, so the formal submission process has a list of 36 questions, which, that's daunting in itself, even if they're like simple questions, but they're complicated questions with words that we don't really know what they mean. And that's enough to put most of us off, I think. So, but it also had the option to email in your own submission. And, I've noticed that I don't think I've seen any experts fill in that questionnaire. They've all just written their own submission and ignored the questions. So, that's why we're directing people to email in their submission, unless they're super geeky on regulation and want to answer all the questions, then go for it. But yeah, definitely, I think they probably would have been looking at 50 submissions largely for it if we hadn't built up this movement and awareness about it. And I've seen literally hundreds of people say on social media that they've already submitted, and so I think we're going to be looking at thousands of submissions against it, which is really powerful. And everyone that's added into the mix between now and tomorrow night will count towards that. So I'd really encourage people to have their say. And I think also, let's not lose sight of two things in this. One is that this is a long game. ACT have been trying to get this through since 2006. And there's big, powerful interest behind it. And, let's put our attention on this. That is not what we want to have, those interests running New Zealand and challenging the government and putting the government in chains. But also, as we stand up against that and expose it, what do we want? What kind of society do we want to live in? What kind of healthy environment do we want? And good drinking water, and being able to swim in the rivers, and being able to get healthcare and education for everyone. And, let's actually keep our focus also on on what we do want, not just getting depressed at fighting off the things we don't want.
That is such a great point, Mel, and it's
Yes.
something, it's part of that bigger, the bigger conversation that needs to happen, and part of the convenience, or what this government, I believe, relies on heavily, is if we just pummel people with a whole lot of stuff and a raft of changes at pace, we get into that reactive space. We've also got the added pressures of, what's going on in our own lives as a result of the changes, and therefore we lose sight of the things that actually keep us in a space of optimism, and we can do this. And I think it was King Aotearoa today, on their story, just posted, I've just been reflecting about how all this noise is kind of pulling me down, and it was just this beautiful picture of Te Taiao, and just that kind of remembering that these things are really hard and they're really challenging, and that also, that's the other side of the coin, is let's talk about our constitutional framework, and let's talk about how we want to live in Aotearoa, in a bicultural society, and how we can work in with the environment and work in ways that are responsive and caring for others. It's a really important point. And I think it's a great thing to sort of pick up on. It was the Tiriti 2040 mahi that was quite sort of prevalent a few years ago. And, those sorts of conversations are really important and uplifting. And yeah, I think it's great to be able to talk about that as well in an email submission, in terms of what our visions are for this country, for ourselves and our whānau now, and for future generations. That's stuff we can all talk about, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's really powerful, those personal voices and stories in a submission. You don't need to feel like you need to use fancy bureaucratic language. And one of the other suggestions that was made by Jane Kelsey for submissions was, to share stories if it's your own or someone who's, suffered because of deregulation, because we haven't talked so much about that, but this bill would also lead to massive deregulation, removal of the regulations that keep us safe. And so if you've got a story of someone who was, had trouble because of leaky homes, or maybe, the Pike River disaster, or forestry injuries at work, the failure of regulation there, or the failure of regulation in the financial sector if someone's lost all their investments. So those personal stories are really important and really powerful. So put those forward if you have
really good point. Actually, I just thought of two things: the forestry slash that has been hugely problematic here in Te Tauihu as a result of substantial flooding and weather events, and also up on the East Coast, and probably many other places. That's a really good example of where there is a need for better regulation, particularly of big business. And I can't remember the other thing, but it might come back. Who knows?
Hopefully by 11:59 tomorrow night.
It was what was the finance company that got bailed out, and they got bailed out more than the summation of all the treaty settlements. What was that in under the national government down in Christchurch? And there was a big, massive. Oh, I can't remember what it was called. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that, how it kind of led to massive financial losses for people, and then the government actually bailed them out. Do you know what I'm talking about, RT?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember. I'm struggling listening to you two talk and enjoying your conversation, and then trying to do research at the same time. That's why I lose my train of thought. It means I'm listening.
Awesome.
Yeah. But Mel, more than welcome to stay. But and I know Jen's got to go soon anyway at Third Space. But some of the discussions that we've had has been around the dirty word. It's called Atlas. Is this all about privatisation, setting it all up. I don't believe they can do it in their first term. I don't believe they have the time. I think time is running out for David Seymour to push through these agendas before the next election cycle. I do have a fear that if this one doesn't go through, that it stirs up the country in opposition, that they may go back to the treaty principles and put more time into that. And again, with Māori being the political football that it is with those guys, spend more time on that. Do you have any thoughts towards that? Rum has joined the chat. I've met her and I'll get her to talk a little bit as well. But do you have any thoughts about that in terms of what you think?
Yeah, so I haven't researched the, Atlas Network stuff much, but I've seen others writing about it. Yeah, I think certainly what's being proposed is very in alignment with some of the right-wing, hard-right libertarian movements around the world and anti-Indigenous people, anti-environment. So, whoever's connected and doing it, it's, and who the influences are. I don't know about that stuff. That's out of my field, but it certainly, there's a lot of alignment of what's being done and how it's being done in different countries and what outcomes are being sought and some of the methods and a lot of the language. So there's very much similarities. I was quite struck by I had a look at the Atlas Network mission statement, I think it was, and it's quite remarkable how much it looks like the proposed treaty principles actually. And correlation doesn't mean causation at all, of course, but Atlas and many of those other international think tanks are very much promoters of libertarian values and neoliberal values, and so they're after a lot of the same things, whether that means they're influencing or directing. That's I don't think we can jump to those conclusions, and there'll be others who are qualified to speak about that, and I'm not. But yeah, certainly there's a big move internationally to this sort of an order, a neoliberal economic order, and a lot of power in the hands of a few very wealthy people.
Yeah. There's a guy in our chat, and we know him well. His name's Kai Matara, and I'm not sure if you follow him on TikTok, but he is the master researcher. he can find things that nobody else can. I don't know how he does it. I'm a good researcher, but oh my gosh, if Kai Matara told me that Atlas was involved right now, then yeah, I'm sold. But with that being aside, I do think there's a chance we can beat this. I just don't know why Winnie is allowing it to happen. Well, we could surmise as to why, but it just doesn't serve New Zealand's interests having ACT push through this agenda. And maybe when David Seymour moves into the Deputy Prime Minister seat and sits next to Christopher Luxon, I just don't know if Winnie's going to be happy with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. And, our voices have power as well. And maybe they had to sign up to it, to get the government sorted, but they're actually not into it. Maybe they are into it and they've just totally changed their values without telling the public. But, I think even New Zealand First campaigned on let's take our country back or something like that last election. And this is pretty much the opposite. It's like, let's give our country away to overseas corporate interests. And so, I think there's a lot of pressure and questioning. And whatever their stance is, voters have a lot of power because they want to get back in next time. So, we shouldn't give up even if they all seem to be into it. And from what you said before, I think that's a good point about, the influence, I can't remember what you said exactly, but around influencing future governments is an important point because, David Seymour said that if he's in opposition next time, that'll be over for his political career, I think I read in Newsroom. And this bill and the Treaty Principles Bill, if either of them get through, they would they would ensure that even if ACT is no longer in power, even if David Seymour's not there, that future governments would have to act much more closely in alignment with ACT party values, even if ACT's not in government. So, I think this could be a real legacy from Seymour and the ACT party if it's allowed to get through. And it's really, really important that it isn't allowed to and that we do stop it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Mel, I think your the work that the work you've done and what you've done in coming across this, and in spite of looking at it and going, that seems really boring, but actually that means I need to look at it. I just really want to acknowledge you for that, and for your continued steadfast focus on this, including the people you've pulled into the space, the fact that you have been so fastidious in your checking and your research, and the people that you're talking to. It really has created a massive body of information that other people have then been able to look at, interpret, and respond to. And just to give you a huge mihi for that. And I know you were doing it with the Treaty Principles Bill way back when, and really calling into question what Seymour was actually doing with his translation, if we like, which wasn't a translation. And just sort of thinking now, reflecting as you're talking about some of the amazing submissions that we have seen people publish, that Rebecca Sinclair, Tania Waikato, Max Harris, I'm missing a few. There's actually one that's on the link tree. But
Jonathan Boston, Jane Kelsey.
Jonathan, yes, and just really to encourage people to go and read those, because the perspectives of each person, and it's a bit like what you said earlier on, that you might talk to someone and they'll say, oh, workers' rights, and someone else, talk about the risks of deregulation. Somebody else might have a direct concern with Te Tiriti or Waitangi. It's the everything bill. But if we're reading those submissions and having a look at them, we really do get that sort of clear picture at how big this is. So awesome work pulling it together, and especially with the link tree that has been added to and added to and added to. It's a really great resource. You're amazing.
I would second.
It's been really inspiring to see that.
I would second that, Mel. Like, without your work, then you filtering it through to Third Space, and Third Space making contact with me, and because we've already built a connection, and making me aware of everything and going on and so forth. So a lot of the stuff that I've been posting and making people aware of has directly come from you, and watching your clips with Jane Kelsey and so forth. So I'd like to say thank you heaps for a big, massive work that you've done. Because it's designed to slip under the radar, especially over the Christmas period when the house isn't sitting. I don't think it's supposed to draw the amount of attention that it's getting. But I think a lot of that can be attributed back to you. You had your eyes open when I can admit mine was closed. So I really appreciate what you've done, and thank you for tonight and coming on and sharing your time. You're more than welcome to come on anytime you like. We don't do these a lot, but they tend to be quite successful with the followers, and that's why we do them, I guess. But yeah, I'd just like to say thanks heaps. We could keep you here, or both of you. For you too, Jen, thanks for coming in. You're always amazing, and I'm going to let you go because I know we could be here till like 11 o'clock at night talking, even though I know you have the best intentions of getting out of here. But yeah, just on behalf of everyone, thanks heaps for everyone, and then me and Rama can do a bit of a debrief. And
awesome.
Yeah, do you guys got any last words?
Oh, you go, Mel.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to come and share with people. I'm very new on TikTok, so this was a first experience for me doing a live. And really just glad I followed that instinct to, everyone's like, look at this shiny thing over here. It's the Treaty Principles Bill. Look at this. And yeah, I followed that instinct to look in the other direction. So and see what was hiding over there. So yeah, follow your instincts and yeah, speak up just with your own true voice about this now and going forward. And yeah, remember to keep in sight the kind of world that we want to live in. Yeah, thank you both so much.
Thanks,
You're
Mal.
welcome.
We'll catch up soon. I hope you have a really good rest, because seeing you still pumping things out today, I was like, oh, girl. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Christmas break's coming up soon, I reckon. Yeah.
Oh, ngā mihi e hoa. Yeah, I just want to add a couple of things. I went into follow your instincts, but also go and follow Mel. Follow Mel on TikTok. Follow Weaving Our Worlds on Instagram, on Substack. Follow Mel. Just follow Mel. Find her. Follow her. And we have got a link tree that is I keep dropping into the chat. And I've also just dropped in to the chat. I've created a chat prompt. So all you need to do is follow that tiny URL link, and it will take you to an open source Google Doc, and you literally fill in the yellow highlighted places. You drop it into Chat GPT, and I really recommend grabbing Tania Waikato's 100 statements, and you might copy out a few, and I've put a link into that chat prompt so you can actually click straight through to it. So all you need to do is feed to ChatGPT the prompt, and it has space that you can add a little bit about you, your background, what you're interested in, which you'll need to obviously include, because as far as I know, AI can't do that yet. But the prompt is there. I've tested it a few times, and it spits out great responses, great emails. And then my advice from that is to lift that out of Chat GPT into an email and personalize it as you see fit. But generally speaking, if you feed it the right information that is in this prompt, then it will give you a really good submission. So hopefully that's useful for people. And Waiti, if you're still there, I'm going to send it to you on Telegram so you can keep dropping it in the chat. Just so it kind of just takes away some of that headspace of having to think about, how to formulate something. And yeah, I just massive acknowledgement again to you, Mel, and to the team of people that we've been working with, to all of the people, all of the creators, all of the people who've been picking this up. Jordan Rivers came in today and said, look, add us as a collaborator. He's been promoting it out. There's just been a huge amount of energy, and now we just need to turn that into email submissions. And I think after the 13th, we'll take a bit of a breather, but there are some definite pathways into responding to the inconsistencies with what is good regulation and this consultation process, and how that actually contravenes the democracy that Seymour espouses to, when it's convenient. I think there's some good advice from Mel around, let's email our local MPs, let's talk to them and get them to be aware of it. And, it is a numbers game when it comes to those emails. The more people, the more media, the more MPs that we are connecting with and saying, we expect you to be speaking to this, they'll have to. And we'll get some strategy together as well. And I know there's lots of other people doing amazing mahi, so just a huge shout out to them. And finally to you, RT, as always, awesome work. You're a connector, you're a weaver. And to everyone in the comments with your awesome questions and your awesome feedback, we love you. Go send the email.
Thanks, guys. Ramo, if you want to stay there, we'll do a bit of a debrief. But thanks heaps, guys. So, yeah, we'll catch up next time.
Yeah, ngā mihi.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. See you. Bye.